Hello and welcome to the penultimate pre-season panel event with Opera Holland Park. The focus tonight is on L'amico Fritz, Pietro Mascagni's unlikely follow-up to Cavalleria Rusticana, a romantic comedy set in the cherry orchards and vineyards of French Alsace. I'm Anna Picard and I'm head of comms and insight at Opera Holland Park. With me tonight to talk about issues like The Girl Next Door, reviving strange forgotten operas, reviving them again, are Josh Spero, acting associate editor at the Financial Times and author of the memoir Second-Hand Stories. Hi, Josh.
Hi.
John Allison, editor of Opera Magazine and an avowed anti-romantic, is that fair?
Could say so. Hello, anyway.
And the director, Julia Burbach, who was to have made her company debut last year with Eugene Onegin and is now making it this summer with L'amico Fritz, the polar opposite in terms of heartbreak. So, L'amico Fritz. We start with a novella by Erckmann Chatrian, a hugely popular duo formed of Émile Erckmann and Pierre-Alexandre Chatrian, who were writing partners from 1847 to 1885, a partnership which dissolved somewhat acrimoniously. Their novello, L'ami Fritz, in 1864 becomes L'ami Fritz, the play, in 1877. In 1890, the play is given to Mascagni to read on a train journey by the publisher Eduardo Sonzogno and the librettist Nicola da Sporo. "I love it. It is just what I want," he said. So here we have a bachelor of some 35 years, very well off, very fond of his food, doesn't want to get married. Suzel, a girl next door, or is she? Rabbi David, confessor, father figure, and matchmaker. Beppe, a gypsy violinist. Hanezo and Federico, who are drinking buddies. So I think we should go at this point just to identify where we are. What is the template for a romantic comedy? Anybody like to chip in on this? I have my own ideas. Maybe you have yours. Josh.
Well, I think it's important in a romantic comedy that we consider the obstacles that stand in the way of our lovers, because it's always about the obstacles they need to overcome. It's never a triumphant march. And I think most of the time the obstacles are the people themselves. Their blindness, their unwillingness to see their own personalities, basically. It's not like there's very rarely in a romantic comedy an external force. I mean, like sometimes it's another girlfriend, but it's because the person can't, or a boyfriend, because the person can't realize that who they actually love. But that tends to be it. People tend to need to get over themselves, as I often hear. So I think that's a good way of thinking about a romantic comedy. You are your own obstacle. And in terms of how they actually work, you know, there can be a meet cute, as they say in Hollywood, some chance meeting, or they might have been friends for years, but not realize that they're actually more than that. But there is always something that sparks it off, and a huge period of denial. And I think one of the key things is that everyone else before them seems to realize. They are the last to know, especially if you look at something like Much Ado About Nothing, even though they're very smart, they are still the very last people to realize what's actually going on.
That's true. That's true of any number of romantic comedies, isn't it? I mean, the fun is in watching them respond in a very delayed fashion. Sometimes there's key differences in outlook or social station, or sort of a philosophical difference, and then you've got to find the inner connection, which, as far as I can work out, in the case of Suzel and Fritz, it lies in two particular things. I mean, one is their connection to this landscape, which is so beautifully described in words by Erckmann Chatrian, and very beautifully described in the music by Mascagni. John, could we talk about romantic comedies in opera? Because when I was trying to think about this, the best example I could think of was L'Elisir d'Amore, which absolutely fits the idea that they're the last to realize how they feel about each other, except in this case, it's a boy next door rather than a girl next door.
Yes, absolutely. I had to think about this. I mean, rom-coms, as you hinted, are not particularly my sort of thing. In fact, I I used to think that Four Weddings and a Funeral was the one about a teenage wizard, if you know what I mean. So I might get my lines a bit crossed, but I was thinking, I was really trying quite hard, came up absolutely with Elysir. And then there are not that many that fit in the way that rom-coms, whether one's looking at, you know, classic movies like, I don't know, Roman Holiday or Pretty Woman, whatever it is. I guess we could, you know, all cite those amongst sort of well-known movies. There are not many operas that are quite as obviously that. I think Elysir is absolutely top of the list, as you say. That is a beautiful, heartwarming, tear-jerking little piece.
Sorry, does this mean that you actually secretly detest L'Elysir?
No, I love it. I'm quite soppy, really. I just in my job I don't get much opportunity to be soppy. But no, it's more. And as I was trying to think what would go around it, I suppose, but one is bending definitions a bit. I would, I suppose, include things like La Cenerentola in this. I mean, basically, the prerequisite is that nobody dies at the end. I mean, and that already narrows the field. But you know, La Cenerentola. I suppose The Merry Widow comes to mind. And then I was also thinking to myself, well, actually, it does go back a bit earlier to. I might suggest Mozart's Entführung. There's some sort of gory twists along the way, and it could all go very wrong. But you know, that is a sort of. I mean, what would you say that Così fan tutte is anyway romantic comedy, or is it? Has it got too many dark undersides?
I'm going to punt that one over to Julia, actually, because as far as I'm concerned, it's the anti-romantic comedy. Yeah. But Julia will probably have her own opinion on this.
No, I think Così is very challenging, very tricky, and no, I wouldn't say it's a romantic comedy at all. Okay. On you know, of course, the topic is love and relationships, but and it touches on things that Josh has said, that people are their own worst enemy and obstacles to themselves. And I think in the course of Così, you know, the characters think that they know what's going to happen to them, and then of course things are very different as we progress. So that's certainly true, but I think it's quite harrowing in many ways. Yeah.
But I mean, when I was thinking about this, I started by thinking about what one of my favorite comedies in opera, and I realized that, I mean, along with L'Elysir, it would be Falstaff and Jenny Skiki. But in Falstaff and Jenny Skiki, the romance is a sort of a background plot to the main thing, which is to do with the machinations of the parents, the machinations of middle-aged people, and that's, I realise, probably why I like those operas so much now.
Can I jump in and suggest that opera is in fact probably one of the worst mediums for romantic comedy that you can imagine?
Don't tell the audience that. We want them to come and see it.
Which is why
it dies at the end. I mean, you know, that's not nice.
Well, but also but I think this is why a romantic comedy well done in opera will be wonderful. But opera basically seems to depend on extremes of emotion. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. This is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. There's a dwarf on my toe. That sort of thing.
What opera is that?
Well, it was a crap Wagner one I saw. It was a bad production.
Always a dwarf somewhere.
Yeah, there's always a dwarf. But romantic comedy does not depend on people really experiencing those most dramatic emotions. I mean, love is, you know, wonderful, but it's not. It never reaches the extremes that we expect of opera. The idea of a romantic comedy is that it's extremely gentle, and opera is not gentle by and large. So I think that's why it's a challenge to do, and obviously why we're very excited to see this production.
Nice pickup there. Nice pickup. Okay, I'm going to put that one on the back burner, and I might return to it. Can we start actually looking at? I mean, there's this thing. Mascagni is the Verismo composer. He composed what some people would argue is the only Verismo opera, Cavalleria Rusticana. Plenty of death there, not much love, no happiness really at all. But was a member of the, Giovane Scuola, which is somewhat harder to roll off the tongue than the Verismo school. I mean, if you're going to add to Cavalleria Rusticana, you could mention Il Tabaro would probably be, you know, core Verismo topic. Margot La Rouge, which we're doing next year, even though it's by Delius, English-German composer and set in Paris, that's, I would say, a core Verismo opera, really. Then you've got Pagliacci, Malavita, I Gioielli della Madonna. I mean, anything that's got an intermezzo in it, plenty of bodies on the stage, and preferably set in a sort of religious holiday. John, would you agree with that definition of Verismo?
I think that's so good. I don't really need to add to it, except to say that I do spend a lot of time trying to sort of edit Verismo out of people's writings, because I think it's quite misleading. I mean, I think this Giovane Scuola is a much better way, but as you say, it doesn't trip off the tongue. People might not know what it means, but to my mind, you know, Verismo is misused. If you think about it, Verismo, vero, veristic, the truth. This is what it is. It's true to life. It's a slice of life, I suppose, and it often deals with poverty. And you know, so your example of Il Tabaro of Puccini from Il Trittico was a very good one. But actually, although we talk about Mascagni as being part of this, most of his operas are very, very far from this. If you think, you know, even of the other ones that Holland Parker staged, like Iris and Isabeau and these pieces, these are not Verismo in that slice of life kind of meaning. So yes, I mean, Cavalleria was the first official Verismo opera, if you like. I mean, there's no question about that, and partly because it had its roots in the literary movement. It had, actually, more specifically, it had its roots in Giovanni Verga, and you know, he was a literary pioneer of Verismo. So in that sense, I would say that Cavalleria absolutely fits that. But if you look back a bit earlier, I like to think that Traviata might be a Verismo precursor, almost alone among Verdi, possibly Carmen as well, maybe. But these things almost don't matter as much as remembering about the Giovane Scuola, which is, you know, the young school. These are the people after Verdi. It's Mascagni, Puccini, Leoncavallo, Catalani, Cilea, and so on. I think that's more. It's a more accurate, more informing kind of label, but it's probably it's less useful. Well, no, it's less. It trips off the tongue. It doesn't trip off the tongue as well as Verismo. It's not as catchy. All those kind of things. I absolutely understand why Verismo is caught on a shorthand, but it's not really adequate, I don't think.
And it's certainly not adequate if you think about things like Wolf Ferrari, Il Segreto di Susanna, which is, yeah, that fits as a romantic comedy, I would say. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have a spat, but they get back together again. But then that's true of any number of sort of divorce romantic comedies. And we're thinking about, you know, High Society. She's getting married to somebody else. She ends up running away with her first husband, which is kind of cute. That's, I mean, how does that fit with meet cute, Josh? What would we do with that? It'd be sort of, you'd have to come up with a different phrase entirely.
Yeah, well, I think
cute.
Say again.
Reunite cute.
Unite cute. Re-meet cute.
Yeah.
Meet cuter.
Meet even cuter. Yeah. Now, going back to Beatrice and Benedick, of course, that was Much Ado About Nothing, and I do wonder whether the nothing is actually quite integral to the whole genre. I mean, everybody is making a fuss about nothing because everybody can see that they're actually supposed to be together. Mascagni insisted that after Cavalleria Rusticana, he wanted a simple libretto, almost insubstantial, so that the opera would be judged on its music alone. Julia, do you think he got what he wanted?
It depends how you want to look at it. what you want to define as insubstantial. I don't think it is. The first time I read it, I thought, that's a bit light. Okay, let's read that again. And then I thought, actually, it's very relatable. These are, actually quite complex humans. I think Fritz, and this ties into what Josh was saying, very clearly is somebody who's just so resistant to the idea of marriage because he probably doesn't believe in it anymore. Maybe he's been hurt, maybe he's been wounded. And that's the only thing that makes psychological sense. So I think the subtext for him is somebody who, just hasn't met the right person yet. And that's why his friends are so, encouraging. And yeah, and I think that colors that. So it's not as simplistic as, two people meet, it's obvious that they're supposed to come together. It actually, as it progresses, they do something else, which is really human. And I mean, I've seen in myself and in many others that if you have that attraction with somebody else, that you then immediately assume that they, of course, don't like you back. Mm-hmm. And this is what we, in all romantic comedies, exactly as Josh was explaining, we as an audience, we enjoy watching that. We enjoy because we understand this in ourselves, and we enjoy that journey of accompanying them on. It's a bit like, when you're watching a detective story, and from the very beginning where the corpse is, and then that sort of holds the tension. So it's not about that we think they're not going to get together. We know they're going to get together. It's more about that we want to know how and what the complications are. So I think it's very delicate in that way, actually, and nice and charming.
I think you could possibly argue that opera as a whole is about the how rather than the what, the what or the where. It seems to be about the how or the why, because there are relatively few operas which have, entirely original plot lines. They tend to be retellings of stories that are, in the first instance from classical myth, or then, sometimes rather fantastically embroidered stories of history. John, would you care to take that further?
Well, yes, I mean, I was very interested in, just to go back one step for a moment to what Julia was saying about the libretto, because it is a sort of simple, appealing thing. If I'm not mistaken, Verdi was quick to denounce it as the worst libretto he'd ever seen. But I think we can put that down to him being a sort of old grump by that stage in his life. I mean, the opera itself has a lot of appealing things about it. After all, Mahler, who we should mention, died 110 years ago today. Sorry, irrelevant detail. Mahler conducted it early in his career in the Hamburg opera in about 1892, so a year after the premiere. I think, to me, what makes this a rather wonderful piece, and I'm not trying to do down one of the Opera Holland Park House composers, but to say that actually L'amico Fritz and Cavalleria together represent the absolute best of Mascagni.
I would agree.
A lot of the others are very, very interesting. I mean, I slightly worry, actually, with so many librettos becoming unperformable, that something as revolting as Iris possibly won't sort of, ever make it back onto the stage. Well, not go there now. Whereas I remember being absolutely intrigued by Isabeau, which is not necessarily a great piece, but it's the only time I've ever seen it. And of course, it was, in a sense, Buenos Aires, the Teatro Colón's answer to the Met having just got Fanciulla. The fact that South America wanted an opera by a major composer. It's a very interesting piece, but to me, it's not nearly as appealing as L'amico Fritz. L'amico Fritz has a very special feel, and together, these came in consecutive years. First of all, Cavalleria, then Fritz, and you could argue it was slightly downhill after that. We don't necessarily need to go into the 1930s and Nerone and all of that. But there's something very special about L'amico Fritz. I totally agree.
Well, it was sort of downhill in wild zigzags, though, wasn't it?
Yes.
I mean, symbolism.
He tried everything.
Gothic, medievalism,
Mm-hmm.
and then yes, Nerone, which we,
You're doing next year?
No.
I thought you were going to say that.
Over my dead body, as if that would make any difference. I just like to sort of return to, I think that one of the loveliest things about L'amico Fritz is actually the novella itself. And you can find that online through, it's downloadable in various sources. I think mine's from the Library of Congress. I think you can get it from Project Gutenberg and archive.org. This is such a lovely setup from, I think, page 4 or 5 of the novella in an 1896 English translation. This tells you who Fritz is, or rather what Fritz's situation is. No one could be happier or more contented than our friend Fritz. But let me tell you, it was not without some trouble. For I leave you to imagine the innumerable propositions of marriage he had to refuse during these 15 years since his majority and since his father died. I leave you to imagine the numbers of widows and blooming young girls who were anxious to devote themselves to his happiness, the cunning plans of prudent mothers who, month after month and year after year, tried to attract him to their houses and induce him to decide in favour of their Charlottes or their Gretchens. No, it was decidedly not without trouble that Fritz Kobus preserved his liberty in the midst of this universal conspiracy against it. So sort of Austinish touch there.
Yeah.
He's a catch.
He's a catch, and he doesn't believe anybody loves him because of him, just because he's rich, or something like that.
Spero records writing arias. Spero, author of the worst libretto that Verdi had ever seen, recalls writing in bed of a morning an aria or a scene, and then copying it afterwards in pen, giving it to Mascagni, who would shut himself into his little room with a piano, and then apparently 30 or 40 minutes later would come up with something, I quote, already beautifully done, alive, vibrant, and complete. Is that fair? Julia.
Oh, right. No, I think it's fair. I think there's so much charm to it, and there's so much honesty to it, and the combination of, we say that the libretto is light or frivolous, but one has to remember that it's, one doesn't observe, you don't absorb just the text. It's a combination of the text, the context, what the performers are doing, what they're expressing, and of course the music. So it's a combination of all of those things that actually enriches it, and that gives you the sort of the full picture. And that's of course part of the job that I get to do that is so wonderful, directing a piece. So you have the music that can maybe suggest, a certain something that might be aspirational, as it were, and the text might be very mundane and the problem that you have right now, and the distance between the two is where the magic happens. So there might be a reason for the text being very, sort of simple or naive, and maybe the music tells you that actually it's maybe that is not all the person wanted to express. So I think you always have to look at the full range of the layers to get the full picture. And it's nice to hear that they were sort of collaborating in this fun way,
I think this makes me, if I may interrupt, feel something really. I'm now very interested to go and read the novella, which I've never encountered before. It would be wonderful to read it. But I think what's important is that the story and the libretto actually unlocked this music in Mascagni. And I think that's what is sort of explained by that anecdote. And the music is really memorable. I have to say, I saw this opera as a child I remember in Cape Town it was actually done as Vriend Fritz in Afrikaans, which is quite exotic. And they did. I saw some very well, relatively obscure operas there. I saw Perry Cole when I was a kid as well, and the L'amico Fritz, and the music absolutely stayed with me. And I hadn't actually looked into the literary background of this particular piece like I often like to, but somehow I hadn't got curious about this one. But I think there must be something in that literary side to unlock music like that.
Well, I do wonder also, I mean, food plays an extraordinarily major role in the novella. And then that, of course, makes me think about Falstaff and, you know, and that wonderful shopping list of on the bill in the Garter Inn in the first scene with the tiny little anchovy at the end. I mean, there is an extraordinary amount of attention is devoted to the cuisine of Alsace: sauerkraut, ham, chitterlings, beignet, bockbeer, Gleiszeder, Steinberg, Pforzheimer, Bordeaux wines, Rudesheim, Markerbrunner, Johannisberg, there we are, mutton, pike, pate, sausages, meatballs, bacon, onion soup, and radishes. And then, of course, cherries. And we get the fabulous cherry duet where they fall in love against the...
What opera Holland Park is going to be serving in the interval? Because that's a big draw.
Well, I'll have to talk to the boss. But I do know that we do have some interesting plans for sort of pop-up food, which we're going to be rolling out during the season. That has not been officially announced yet. Yes, good point. Yes, sauerkraut. Nice. Julia, can you tell me... you've done a lot of, as you put it earlier, sort of dark, gnarly operas. What is it like going from Wagner to directing comedy and romance?
It's, you know, it's actually very, very challenging, and I mean this in the sort of way that I have a lot of respect for the pieces that might commonly be seen as, oh, this is light, this is easier, this is comedy, but it's not so. I think they are just as demanding, but in a very, very different way. So I've had a lot of fun. You know, I was in the middle of lockdown when I obviously was given this opportunity, and when I sat down and actually started listening to the music. And I always, when I start working on a piece, for me, it's always the music that tells me where the story has to go. So that in a way is the key, the spinal cord of where, you know, where I know how to unlock everything. And this spoke to me very, very quickly. And it's actually very psychologically structured. So not dissimilar to Wagner in some ways, but obviously in a different way. And you know, when I sort of then listen to the music, I can sort of see the beats of the subtext and the text, and when people are revealing their private personas and when they're revealing their public personas, and all of that, yeah, has been really wonderful. And I've got to say, it's been nice to be working on this in actually otherwise, you know, very difficult and challenging times, to be surrounded by this piece rather than, I don't know, something else that might have been much heavier. So yeah, wonderful. I hope I get to do more of it in the future.
But you were saying earlier that you've been approached about more obscure operas as well. I mean, yeah. L'amico Fritz is not, John referred earlier to Mascagni as being Opera Holland Park's house composer, which I would slightly object to, because I would say that's probably Verdi. But you've got even more unusual things in your...
You know, I mean, L'amico Fritz I had certainly heard of before and seen before, so it wasn't entirely off the beaten track. But yeah, so what I'm doing right now is a Henze opera called Das Wundertheater, and I thought that was pretty obscure. And then I'm doing something in Wexford by Catalani called Edmea, which at the time I'd certainly never heard of, and I don't think most other... I mean, it's a season where they obviously want to promote things that aren't very known, so that makes perfect sense. And then there's a Schreker piece coming my way in a couple of years. So what's a nice challenge about these pieces, if people don't have a lot of knowledge of it, on the one hand, you have a responsibility to the piece to kind of shape whatever that shape it in a way that if they're not done very often, then you have a responsibility to the piece to do it well, I think. But also it might give you more freedom to explore other avenues if it hasn't been done so much. So I sort of detach myself anyway from other productions when I do my own work, because that doesn't help my process. But I suppose with these things, it's easier because there's literally nothing you can find, you'll be hard pressed to find a synopsis. So, so there we are. So, yeah, but it's good. It's just happened this way, and it's a good challenge.
So, I mean, then it's doubly the contrast to doing Onegin, which, is an opera that is...
That is very true, because Onegin is so loved, so well known, and so loved by myself, growing up with it. I've seen, many productions of it. I love the Krankel ballet. And yeah, that's then very, very different, because I appreciate that people come and have a lot of expectations of what they want it to be, a certain period, a certain look, a certain, a certain approach to the characters. And to a certain extent, one has to detach oneself from that and sort of look very deeply inside one's own, heart and soul, of finding out what do I think is the, the kernel of that story that I want to tell. And I found one, which is, it's sort of heartbreaking. It's all blocked with stickers in the book, and then of course it never happened. So I'll better dust it off for next year. I'll probably have some new ideas.
Good.
Onegin, because you mentioned it a bit earlier, and it got me thinking that Onegin also has an older man who, after many years single, falls in love with a younger woman. But obviously it's in a different style. It's much graver. Groening's great aria in the final act, or the final scene. But I thought that was curious that they do have these sort of little parallels, but are played so differently.
It's true. It's almost like, and even if you think of Tatiana and Onegin, sort of, I actually think of them in a way as mirrors of each other. I think they have a lot of similarities in their characters. So they're sort of outsiders in their world and misunderstood by their surroundings. And in that way, they kind of meet each other and understand each other. But of course, they might not be the ideal lovers for each other, as it were, at the same moment in time. But I think we can emote with them because of that, because they're sort of loners. And of course, in Fritz, it's also true, because Fritz is a loner in his group of friends. They sort of tease him. He's unhappy. It starts with his birthday. He doesn't really want the birthday. He's not in the right mood, but everybody else wants to party. And I think this is something everybody can relate to, the birthday party, where you're sort of in a pensive zone, thinking about the past, the future, and the present, and everybody else is just jumping at you with cake and drinks, and you feel obliged to cater towards that. And so I think in a way, actually they're not so dissimilar.
And there's the name day party in Onegin, so come think of it.
You're totally right. And she's also not in the mood for her.
She's mortified. She's absolutely mortified.
But of course, it's a classic, wonderful structure in drama, because drama lives through contrast, doesn't it? So you put somebody who is in a certain mood in a situation that is the opposite, and that everything makes each other pop. So, that sort of isn't surprising. That's a strong construct. But I think it's quite charming in Fritz how we go from that sort of unhappy birthday party sort of in a way to a happy potential, wedding or engagement party. So it's sort of anchored by these classic events. Yeah, which I'm
afraid at my birthday party, I'm only ever thinking about the cake. No guests, no past, present, future, just cake.
Cake. Where is the cake? Bring me the cake.
Exactly.
The whole business of, reviving forgotten operas, or refreshing the canon. John, you've probably seen more forgotten operas than anybody here. How many of them have you thought, oh yes, that's fantastic, I'm very glad I saw it? And how many of them have you thought, yes, I can completely understand why nobody has seen this since, 1851?
Yeah, I probably liked an unhealthy number of them, which is why I would be terrible at running an opera company. I would probably put on all these pieces and ignore the butterflies and all that. I cheerfully admit to being a bit of a nerd when it comes to these things, but not only that, I'm just interested in particular parts of the repertoire that are relatively obscure, mostly, but not exclusively East European Slavonic opera, and I've sort of got pet things I'm interested in there, but actually I end up going to a lot of rare pieces, and in some ways they're quite, I think it's probably a bit like directing them. What Julia was saying, you've got a responsibility to get this piece right, because if it's got that one chance, and equally I think as critics we've got a responsibility to go to find out about these pieces and make the case for them if there is a case to be made. Sometimes, and people are quite fond of saying that obscure operas almost all deserve their obscurity and there's a good reason why they're neglected. And that's not really true. At the same time, I totally get why the canon, or most of the canon anyway, is so popular. I mean, these are operas that work, have enduringly good tunes, have indestructible storylines, well, most of them anyway. I understand why the popular pieces dominate, but I really do like to see the repertoire spiced up with other things, and I am guilty of sort of going after some of the obscurities and really enjoying them. I mean, yeah, sometimes you go to something and you see absolutely why it's been neglected, but it's still interesting. If you're at all interested in the art form, then even the duds can be quite interesting.
Okay then, if you were to draw up a list, I'm going to put this to each of you in turn. If you were to draw up a list of 5 operas that are seldom, okay, Josh, don't worry. If you were to draw up,
I was like, get it down to 5. Wow.
Okay. If you were to draw up a list of 5 operas that you feel have been really unfairly neglected and that should enter the repertoire, which 5 would they be? John, I'm coming to you first, just because we were on that topic before.
Well, I don't think that fast, but I think I would probably start with something. And some of these pieces, I'm talking about pieces that I've seen, so that I know they're worthwhile. So they're not 100% neglected. But I mean, I would start with, say, Rubinstein's Demon. I would. That's a wonderful. I mean, it's just got fantastic music. It's based on Lermontov. It's a very, very strong piece.
Didn't Tavarestovsky do it as well?
He did the arias. Nearly all the great Russian baritones have recorded the arias, and understandably so. They're wonderful. But there are interesting parallels actually with Onegin. There's a sort of long love-hate duet, if you like. It's when it's done well, it's a fascinating piece. I would actually, well, I've got a thing about Moniuszko operas, the great Polish composer. I think something like, well, actually, there are too many to choose from there.
You've mentioned Halka in the past.
Yes, I mean Halka and also The Haunted Manor. These are the sort of well-known ones. But beyond that, I would probably have a little bit of trouble deciding which I like the most. I've been fascinated by a couple of recent productions of Paria, which is his only one not set in Poland. But I mean, that to me seems very, very strong, surprisingly strong. Sticking with actually bridging the sort of Italian school we're talking about and Eastern European literature, I would love to see Ponchielli's I Lituani, which is based on Konrad Wallenrod of Mickiewicz. Mickiewicz, who wrote the national poem of the epic poem of Poland, Pan Tadeusz. He also wrote this Konrad Wallenrod, and I Lituani is based on that. How many?
Sorry, I Lituani meaning the Lithuanians.
The Lithuanians, yes. That's another example. How many have we got to?
I think you're up to like 4.5.
Okay, well, yes. Does that mean I can only have a one actor, or
yes?
No. Well, Well, in that case, I think I would go for one of the short Martineau operas that hardly ever get done, because, you know, he wrote in so many different genres. He was hard to pin down. He had to go at every kind of thing, except Wagnerism was not his thing, but he wrote a large-scale opera in the style of, you know, when it came to Greek Passion, which is relatively well known. He wrote a symbolist piece with Giulietta, but all the other sort of 13 or 14 operas are very little known. I'd love to see a really good production of one of those little pieces. There are just too many wonderful things to choose from, really.
I remember The Knife's Tears, done in a
Yes.
disused studio in Covent Garden. I bet that's not disused anymore. I'm sure it's luxury apartments. Josh, what would be on your wish list? It doesn't have to be super obscure.
I just don't think there've been enough Traviatas. I mean, come on, you know.
I'm delighted for you saying that. I hope you weren't being sarcastic, because personally, I never tire of that opera, because I think, as John said rightfully earlier, it is realism. That's opera's Zola moment.
I have to say, I'm not as expert as my fellow two panelists in obscure operas. I think I would mainly hope for new operas that get like one showing. You know, I saw a great opera by, I think, Lawrence Osborne at the Polish Cultural Center a couple of years ago, based on a surreal Soviet play, I think, or text. And I would love to see that again. I really want to see new operas that people put on that maybe get one or two performances, because that is how we, you know, we can enrich the canon by resurrecting old ones, obviously, which is good, but we can also enrich it by supporting new ones. So I would definitely put in and I'm not saying that either of my fellow panelists is opposed to that, but I think I would put in a plea for that, some more new work.
Actually, yeah, thinking about recent operas, I mean, I would love to see The Cricket Recovers again, which was switched airs about, what, 15 years ago, John?
Think about, yeah.
Yeah. Julia?
Well, I think what both Josh and John are saying is really valid. I think we need, you know, we need new ones to be written for sure, and so that we can enlarge the genre, but also, you know, old and obscure ones should be dug up and one can see, you know, there's no doubt little gems around here and there. I'm going to choose one that's not so obscure, but it's something that I worked on ages ago at the Bayerische Staatsoper, but I haven't seen since, and I thought was such a wonderful piece, and it's the Basarids by Hense, which I thought is just the most, you know, sort of the reason that I got stuck in opera, because I thought, God, this is sensational, and what an amazing piece. And it was a Christoph Lloyd production. It was just, never worked so hard in my life. It was absolutely staggering. And I thought, why haven't I seen that since? I appreciate it's very hard to do and probably very expensive to pull off, but what an amazing and sort of timeless modern construct. You know, very political, very, very earnest, very real, very, you know, I mean, and just fabulous. Yeah, not seen it anywhere. There we are.
I'm trying now to think that there's an extraordinary Salieri opera. It's either Basarids or Maenads. What is it? Warring Women and...
Well, Basarids, I don't know.
Yeah, possibly. I heard it once and I just thought this is fantastic and this really, really deserves going, being put on stage. And my other wish list would be Ariane Barbe Bleue by Ducasse. We've gone way off track here, sorry. Are romantic comedies sort of the ultimate heteronormative genre? Josh? Because I can only think of Kissing Jessica Stein.
I too can only think of Kissing Jessica Stein. She was a girl I was at school. No. Joke. I think, yes, I think romance, the whole idea of romance is heteronormative. Now, when I say heteronormative, it doesn't necessarily mean heterosexual. It means modeled on a very established pattern of relationships where one person is with another person, they're faithful forever, and, you know, they fall in love. And that's what heteronormativity means to me in the sort of relationship terms, and that all derives from, you know, the medieval French chivalric romances and things like that. That's where we have these concepts of romance from, courtly love, and they have endured for hundreds of years. So yes, I think you can't, the romantic comedy can never be anything but heteronormative, because it works within that structure of one person loving another person forever. That doesn't mean you can't have can't have comedies about romance, but they don't have to, they don't get classified as romantic comedies because they're about 3 people falling in love, or 2 people hating each other, or infidelity, or things that don't fall within that kind of 1 + 1 = forever style of film or opera. So you get things, there doesn't have to be a happy ever after, for example. Like that is, that would be an unheteronormative way of having something, but you wouldn't then call it a romantic comedy because it just doesn't fit those parameters. So yeah, they are mutually exclusive, but that doesn't mean there aren't kind of exciting films about love that aren't also funny, but they just wouldn't fall in this bucket of romantic comedy. You could have, there's a sweet one called Love, Simon, about a gay teenager at school in America, and he falls in love with another boy. And that's heteronormative. It's about gay people, but it's still very heteronormative because it's about love and fidelity and forever. So yeah, the romantic comedy is entirely heteronormative. You can't disassociate it from that. But that doesn't mean that there won't be funny romantic things that just don't kind of fall outside that bucket.
I think there's a gap in the market then for sort of polyamorous romantic comedy. Could be quite complicated technically to sort of put together, but it might be fun.
If I have 5 or 6 people singing at once, then why? That's musical polyamory.
Absolutely. George Hall, who has written for John many times and is a fine critic, and has composed one of the 2 essays in our programme books for L'amico Fritz this summer, has a theory which he shared with me this weekend, which is that Ephron and Chatrian were more than writing partners. I don't know if we can ever stand that up, but there are some charming photographs of the 2 of them before they fell out so acrimoniously. They always have their arms around each other, and I wonder if there's something there about a friendship that maybe doesn't fit the heteronormative norms. One of them got married, the other one didn't, but they were close as close can be. I think we're probably nearing the end, except I want to ask just one question, and this relates to Rabbi David's role in the opera, which is amongst sort of father figure, spiritual guide, and all that, and also a person who is basically attempting to make Fritz and Suzel reproduce so they can repopulate the Alsace with French people. He's the matchmaker. He is the matchmaker. I want to ask John, have you ever attempted to matchmake a couple, or have you ever been subject to being match made?
Quick answers are no and no. I'm sorry to be so boring about that, but I am actually I'm suddenly interested in all of this. I've suddenly also remembered talking about romantic comedies. I mean, there's one of the greatest of all ones has a matchmaker, and that's The Bartered Bride.
Of course.
But I also find myself really wondering about this rabbi figure, because unless you go into really obscure operas, the sort of settings of Dybbuk and Golem and these pieces, there are not that many rabbis in opera. There are a couple of famous ones in La Juive and on a rather grand scale in Nabucco. But actually, there are not that many, and it's quite a change of tone after Cavalleria, which is sort of ultra Catholic. Suddenly we're in sort of, shall we say, Oive Maria territory with this one. But I don't know.
Except we have Rabbi David. We also have, I think Fritz is Catholic, and I think Suzel is Anabaptist. So it's the most amazingly sort of flexible, ecumenical community.
It strikes me as a really interesting character, but I would have to go and read the novella, which is my homework before the production.
Okay, Julia. Have you match made, or have you been match made?
No, I think it's a no and no again, but wouldn't that be fabulous to be a wonderful matchmaker? And, I would imagine that I would do it in such a subtle way that they wouldn't even know it's happening. Sort of the way that a good director sprinkles notes that the people don't even know that they're changing, you know what I mean? And it's all sort of happened because of something you said. Yeah, no, I think great skill to have if you have it. We need more of them everywhere. Fantastic.
Josh.
Have I been match made? You should meet my mother. Permanently matchmaking me. When she found out I was gay, she went from matchmaking me with women to matchmaking me with men, like with barely a heartbeat.
We need her around. Bring her along.
She was going to make a guest appearance this evening, but decided not to follow
Well, I think you all need to sort of put your shoulders to the grindstone, or whatever the phrase is. I got a couple up the altar. It took years, but I got them up to the altar. We're going to take a tiny break before our goodbyes and our thank yous to listen to Keandra Howarth and Stuart Wilde performing Suzel's aria Son Pochi Fiori. Keandra Howarth singing Suzel's aria, Son Pochi Fiori, and the sharp-eyed amongst you will have noticed that that was most certainly not Stuart Wilde. That was the very, very lovely Fran Hills. Thank you for watching us tonight, and thank you to Chloe and Simon, who are off camera doing brilliant things. Thank you to Josh and to Julia and to John. Our next and final pre-season event is on the Pirates of Penzance at 7 p.m, May 25th. That's a week from now. We will have guests John Savonin, Richard Burkhardt, and Yvonne Howard. L'amico Fritz opens July the 16th. You can find full details on our website, www.operahollandpark.com. To play us out, a small clip from our 2021 Young Artists Masterclass with the wonderful Amanda Rucroft. You can find the whole session online. Thank you very much and good night.
Have you watched Mamma Mia?
Yes.
Isn't it fabulous?
I love it.
Have you seen Meryl Streep singing The Winner Takes It All?
Yeah.
How many times does she say The Winner Takes It All?
Quite a few.
Quite a few,
Yeah.
and she never says it the same way,
No.
does she? So there's your homework.
Yeah. Watch Mamma Mia.
Go and watch Mamma Mia and watch how she
Glad you do.
finds a different way,
Yeah.
a different intention. You can hear what I call the third translation over the top.
Yeah.
So you could perhaps work on that. We'll work on it.
Sure.
I'll maybe see if we can spark a bit more imagination.
Yeah.
Have you got nieces, nephews?
No. I have
Okay.
a much younger brother. if
Have
that
you?
helps.
Yeah. Did you ever read him stories? How much younger?
9 years. But yes.
Okay. Yeah. So can you remember when you were about
Yeah, sure.
11 trying to read a story to your brother at 2?
Sure. Yeah, okay. Yeah, fine. Okay.
They're like eels at that age, aren't they? They kind of like slip out of your fingers and they leave the room when you're talking to them. They're like puppies. You can't keep them in the basket.
Okay.
Yeah? And if you were to try to engage a 2-year-old with a story, it wouldn't be once upon a time there were 3 bears and they decided to go for a walk and he'd be off, gone. Yeah, but once upon a time, there were 3 bears and they went in, and so you're engaging. There's more energy there than you think you actually need.
Okay.
So if you think of us as 2-year-old toddlers, yeah?
Sure.
You've got to keep us engaged. And it's not in your singing.
Sure, okay.
And it's all in the rests.
Right, okay. Okay.